Star Trek Strange New Worlds is the greatest return to classic Trek that's come out of the newest wave of shows taking place within the Federation of Planets. With 2 seasons down, what do you need to know before heading into the 3rd year of this continuing mission? Strange New Worlds isn't about some massive episode-spanning galactic conflict, and when the showrunners set out to create a season for the show, they intentionally focus on giving each episode a different tone. And while it might seem jarring to jump from an episode about war crimes into an adventure that's almost entirely told in song, it works. If you don't know where to start, you can pretty much jump in at any time. The newest trailers and teasers reveal that Season 3 is following in that tradition. Of course, there's the usual sci-fi space adventure stuff, but it's also punctuated with a lot of classic Trek diversions, including a Tom Paris-styled retro-futuristic adventure that looks like it takes place on the candy-colored bridge of the original series. But that's not the only unexpected tie to classic Trek. We get quick glimpses of new versions of familiar fan-favorite characters. We're also getting some exciting firsts, like a 3-armed Edosian alien shows up in live action for the first time, having first shown up in the oft-maligned animated series. We get a 1970s holodeck murder mystery, a Vulcan holding roses, screaming Klingons, and zombies. So if you think you know what to expect, you probably don't, and there'll probably be an episode that will win you over, as long as you're ready to re-embrace the weirdness that defined early Star Trek. Every Star Trek series is defined by its captain, and Strange New Worlds has Christopher Pike. Trek geeks know that Pike was the captain of the Enterprise in the series' original pilot, The Cage. When that pilot flopped, series creator Gene Roddenberry reworked the series with a reimagined cast, and Captain James T. Kirk at the helm. But not all was lost for Pike. The character returned in the 2-parter The Menagerie, which used the unaired footage from The Cage as historical documentation of an earlier event. It was a clever way to salvage what was actually a pretty good pilot episode and give Pike a place in Star Trek canon. Unfortunately for Captain Pike, when we meet him in the original series, he's sitting speechlessly in a beeping metal box, deformed by a terrible accident. His suffering is eventually ended when his friend and First Officer Spock hijacks the Enterprise to bring him to a forbidden planet that will give him peace for his remaining years. Strange New Worlds elaborates on this powerful relationship in ways that the original series was never able to. While Strange New Worlds works great as a standalone series, it actually has roots in Star Trek Discovery, a largely divisive series that didn't really feel like Trek to many fans. Sure, Discovery had a few bright spots, like the appearance of the classically chaotic Harry Mudd, the charming officer Saru, and a glimpse into the far, far future of the galaxy, but the arrival of Pike's Enterprise was the best thing to come out of the series. During Pike's service to the Federation, he's recruited to enter a Klingon temple and retrieve a time crystal. Of course, this comes at a terrible price. Pike becomes acutely aware that he's going to barely survive a terrible explosion during a simple training accident which kills 2 cadets, and face a life of pain and misery. He knows exactly when it'll happen, he knows everyone involved, and it's a burden that convinces him to resign from Starfleet, hoping to change his fate.
It's almost a decade away.
Is that soon? Suddenly that feels soon. I can't stop seeing it.
And it's pretty much universally agreed that Anson Mount's version of Pike is exceptional and has the best hair in the galaxy. If you've never seen Pike in action, you might come away with a new favorite captain. Sorry, Jean-Luc. This is where we find Captain Pike at the start of Strange New Worlds. He's exiled himself to a remote area of Montana, trying as hard as he can to never return to space and get melted by radiation. Pike is pulled back into duty to do things that only Christopher Pike can do, and over the course of the first season of Strange New Worlds, he comes to terms with his fate. He has no other choice. He's visited by himself from the future of an alternate timeline where he never gets injured and Kirk never takes over the helm of the Enterprise. The unfortunate result of this is that Kirk isn't around to make the right choice to prevent a Romulan war and the death of Spock. Pike, in a moment that defines his character, decides to live his best life now, despite knowing that something terrible will happen to him and 2 others in just about 7 years. While Pike was mostly an undefined character prior to Strange New Worlds, Spock is probably one of the best-loved and well-known figures from the franchise. So Trek fans understandably approached Ethan Peck's version of Spock with a lot of trepidation. Fortunately, the reaction has been almost unanimously positive. In this series, we see his complicated early relationship with his future wife, T'Pring. They continuously struggle to work things out, not knowing that T'Pring would eventually decide she wants a co-worker named Stonn instead. She forces Spock to fight for her in the original series episode episode Amok Time in a scheme designed to destroy their relationship. Nurse Christine Chapel pines after Spock, and the feeling, as much as half Vulcans have feelings, is mutual, and we see Spock and Chapel sharing an intimate moment in a third season trailer. It's not a relationship that comes from out of nowhere. Chapel expressed an interest in Spock in the original series as well, during the episode The Naked Time, when the Enterprise is poisoned by space goop into being their most honest, unrestrained selves. This, along with Spock's difficult relationship with his half-brother Sybok and father Sarek, promise to be an ongoing theme in future seasons. Another undefined character who was cast off from the abandoned original series pilot, the woman known previously only as Number 1, finally gets a personality, a backstory, and an actual name. Originally played by Majel Barrett, then mistress to Gene Roddenberry, the role of Una Chin Riley is taken over by Rebecca Romaine, who plays her as a straight-laced, highly capable first officer. The reason that she's so capable, as we find out, is that she's an Illyrian, an alien race that genetically engineers themselves to fit into their environment wherever they may settle. Her engineering gives her extraordinary immunity to illness and augmented strength, among other subtly superhuman abilities. The Illyrian race is briefly introduced in Enterprise, but we now see a fuller story here, and the Federation doesn't like them. Due to the eugenics wars of the late 20th or 21st century, depending on when you look, genetic augmentation is banned in the Federation. Genetic engineering created one of the worst threats that Earth had ever faced in Noonien-Singh. We saw what could happen to an augment if they were discovered within the ranks of Starfleet when Dr. Julian Bashir of Deep Space Nine discovered he was augmented. While he was allowed to remain a doctor, his father was jailed, and that was 100 years after Strange New Worlds, when Starfleet was even more progressive.
Despite what the authorities would like us to believe, genetic engineering is nothing to be ashamed of. You're not any less human than anyone else.
As Season 1 closes, Una is arrested for being an augment, and while she's allowed to return to the Enterprise early on in Season 2, it's a burden she has to bear. By the time of Lower Decks, over 100 years later, she's regarded as a Starfleet hero worthy of being put on recruitment posters.
Numero Una, hottest first officer in Starfleet history.
The original nurse Christine Chapel was also played by Majel Barrett, this time in a role that stuck. Gene Roddenberry just had to find a way to get his future wife on the show after her pilot role was axed. She only appears in 25 episodes on the original series, and rarely as a core character, so her story isn't too complex at the outset of Strange New Worlds. Barrett, who would eventually marry Roddenberry and hyphenate her name, would go on to play multiple roles in Star Trek, including Lwaxana Troi and the voice of the ship's computer in multiple series.
Hello, computer? Is Commander Riker still on the bridge?
Negative. Riker is currently in holodeck 3.
This Nurse Chapel, played by Jess Bush, is a veteran of the Klingon War, having served with Dr. Mbenga in a medical capacity. She also has an on and off relationship with Spock. Before the close of Season 2, she decides to leave the Enterprise to escape her feelings and serve aboard the Cayuga, where she meets Dr. Roger Corby. However, when the Cayuga is destroyed, she's rescued by Spock, and their troubled relationship promises to be a recurring theme in Season 3. It should be no spoiler to Trek fans that during her time in the Cayuga, Chapel begins to fall in love with Dr. Corby, and they eventually get engaged, according to the original series episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of?, until Corby goes missing and replaces himself with a robot. They never marry. Original Trek wasn't always great at fleshing out its female characters, despite how progressive it was at the time by including them on the bridge and in core functions. They still had to wear short skirts, serve drinks, and rarely got backstories. So while we all knew that Lieutenant Uhura could sing and dance, and she was a talented communicator, she never really had a complex story, despite being in 3 seasons and 6 movies. In Strange New Worlds, she's a new ensign just starting out on her journey into space. She lacks confidence, but she's a genius when it comes to communication. Original Trek may have reduced the role of communicator to being a glorified switchboard operator, but Enterprise really emphasized the importance of early intergalactic communications, and just how difficult it could be in the days before the universal translator was perfected. You actually had to know alien linguistics and couldn't rely entirely on AI to not hallucinate some weird alien profanity that could start a war. And it didn't get that much easier in the Next Generation era either.
Klaxon Ries Blaj Blanarnik Karnik.
Uhura uses her language skills to solve some of the many sci-fi puzzles the crew faces, and of course, she still likes to sing. La'an Noonien-Singh, played by Christina Chong, is part of the terrible Khan dynasty, even though she wants nothing to do with it. As of now, we don't know exactly how she's related to the overly ambitious guy who took over a quarter of the Earth as a genetic Superman in the 21st century and then fled into space, got exiled to a desolate prison planet, and then showed up to stick a worm in someone's ear before getting blown up for good. A skilled combatant and extremely serious security officer, La'an's biggest story beat in 2 seasons of Strange New Worlds is a time travel adventure with an alternate timeline James T. Kirk to 21st century Toronto. The two fall in love while battling secret Romulan forces bent on murdering a young Khan, preventing the eugenics wars, and thus preventing the formation of the Federation of Planets, the force that keeps future Romulans from gaining too much galactic power. Much like the inevitability of Pike's terrible accident, Khan must live to destroy Earth so it can build itself up again. Upon resetting the timeline, La'an later discovers that this Kirk is already in a relationship with Carol Marcus, who would later become the mother of his child. Business continues as usual, with La'an nursing a broken heart but far more comfortable with herself. She also has a pretty traumatic history with the Gorn, a terrifying alien race of lizard people who killed her family when she was just a kid. Like many on the Enterprise, navigator Lieutenant Erica Ortegas, played by Melissa Navia, is also a veteran of the Klingon War, serving with enough distinction that she be regarded as a war hero in the distant future of Lower Decks. Ortegas has yet to get a really good solo episode of backstory, but her name has roots in distant Trek history. The original navigator in the pitch for 60s Star Trek was named Ortegas, but the character was never used. Her entry on the unofficial Star Trek wiki, Memory Alpha, is surprisingly short, so there's a lot left to be discovered about Ortegas. In this season, her younger brother shows up on the Enterprise, offering up the opportunity for a lot more background. Even hardcore Trek heads may have missed that Dr. Joseph Mbenga is actually an obscure 2-episode character from the original series, but now he's had a couple of outstanding arcs in Strange New Worlds. Mbenga is played by Babsalu Samokun, and his first season is plagued by the pain of secretly keeping his ailing daughter in a transporter buffer as he searches for a cure for her rare disorder. He can't spend too much time with her. Every moment outside of the buffer is another minute closer to her death, which is something he cannot face. Eventually, his daughter is made whole by an alien consciousness, but she also must leave the Enterprise to survive, marking a painful but essential separation. He also struggles with his history on the front of the Klingon War, and it all comes to a head when Klingon ambassador Doc Ra comes on board the Enterprise. General Doc Ra is credited with killing his own generals after they cruelly executed 1,000 civilians, and then defecting to the Federation, earning the name the Butcher of Jagal. In truth, it was Dr. Mbenga who killed these generals while under the influence of a performance-enhancing drug, while Doc Ra took credit and fled. The lie helped to advance peace between Klingons and the Federation, but it wore heavy on Mbenga, who is the only one who knows that Doc Ra is actually a mass murderer. Their encounter ends with Mbenga killing Doc Ra in a fit of rage right in sickbay. The murder is covered up as self-defense, and Mbenga remains tortured, a massively complex character. Played by the quirky Carol Kane, Pelia is a second-season addition to the Enterprise, showing up as a former Starfleet Academy instructor and currently a fleet inspector and engineer. She's a Lanthanite, a previously unknown alien race which lives for thousands of years and who've comfortably integrated with Earth society since the dawn of civilization. Throughout her time on Earth, she hung out in ancient Greece, ran a Vermont antique shop, and was good friends with Spock's mom. She's also a hoarder.
Once you have lived through every natural disaster and economic calamity in human history.
Like Guinan on The Next Generation, she has the benefit of having witnessed a huge portion of human history, and having been a pretty merciless teacher at the Academy, Pelia already knows many members of the Enterprise crew. An iconic character from the original series, Montgomery Scott didn't show up until the finale of the second season of Strange New Worlds, in a real getting the team together moment. He's stuck in a settlement full of marauding Gorn, and he's engineered a way to stay alive despite the odds, which is exactly the Scotty we've always loved. We don't know much about this young Scotty yet, but we know he has a long future aboard the Enterprise ahead of him, that he'll eventually end up stuck in a transporter buffer for 75 years before he's rescued by Picard's Enterprise, when he'll get drunk, lament being lost in time, and sail off into the sunset to an unknown fate. In terms of timelines, Strange New Worlds is promised to run right up to the beginning of the original series, which means that we'll eventually have to get the original bridge crew all in one place. A trailer revealed that in this upcoming season, Kirk will have the opportunity to take control of the Enterprise for the first time. For now, we're still missing Hikaru Sulu, Pavel Chekhov, Dr. Leonard McCoy, and Janice Rand. But wait, Chekhov didn't even appear until the second season of the original series. This sets up the biggest alleged plot hole in the Wrath of Khan.
But you, I never forget a face. Mr. Chekhov.
How can Khan know Chekhov if he encountered the Enterprise in the first season of the original series in the episode Space Seed? The answer to this was in plain sight all along. The start date of Space Seed places it chronologically after some episodes of the second season. The too long didn't listen summary is that we didn't see the episodes in order of their actual timeline, and Chekhov was just hanging out in the background the whole time where Khan met him off-screen. He's from Russia, is in his early 20s, and serves as the Enterprise's navigator and science officer. He never makes permanent captain, but his son eventually becomes the president of the Federation. Chekhov's best friend about the Enterprise is Hikaru Sulu, another Star Trek legend without too much of an elaborate backstory, despite being one of the founding fathers of Trek. We know he eventually becomes the captain of the Excelsior, serves with Voyager's Tuvok, and has a daughter who also joins Starfleet. Then there's Bones. Dr. Leonard McCoy is part of the original trinity of Star Trek stars, a sarcastic Southern doctor with a distrust of transporters and Vulcans. If there's one thing an authentic recreation of original Trek needs, it's the barbed relationship between Bones and Spock, which made for some of the best moments in the series. And Yeoman Janice Rand is another character who deserves to be elevated to something a little more than a secretary for the captain. She's only in 8 episodes of the original series, and pops up in the movies a few times as a minor character, despite her role being planned to be much larger. Actor Grace Lee Whitney's difficult relationship with production ended up causing her role to be minimized. So Strange New Worlds presents a great opportunity to see Gene Roddenberry's original vision for Rand, and this time her personality can be a little more than lady who brings Kirk drinks. The Next Generation and Voyager had the Borg, Deep Space Nine had the Cardassians and the Dominion, and Strange New Worlds has the Gorn? The Gorn were a one-episode villain from the original series, and they were notoriously awful, usually held up as an example of the limitations of old-school Trek, and how they weren't always handled well. Lumbering, savage, and apparently dim-witted, but somehow smart enough to travel through space, there's no way to take Kirk's hand-to-hand combat with the original Gorn captain seriously. But these reimagined Gorn seem to be the biggest threat in this era of Star Trek, and it's a drastic design change that viewers don't seem to mind, unlike the weird Klingons from Discovery. Appearing multiple times throughout the seasons, the Gorn are responsible for the murder of La'an's family. They lay their eggs in living hosts, and despite stalking their prey like wild animals, they're smart enough to strategize and conquer worlds. They're merciless and refuse to communicate, and are causing terror throughout this quadrant of the galaxy. Season 2 ends on a cliffhanger in the middle of a skirmish with the Gorn, after crossing into Gorn space to rescue some colonists, including Pike's girlfriend, Captain Batel, who has already been infected with Gorn eggs. Multiple crew members are left behind. Pike has to decide if he wants to stick around and rescue them, or flee and fight another day. This is where Season 3 begins. Spock's secret half-brother isn't revealed until the 5th Star Trek movie, The Final Frontier. There, it's shown that he's denied the teachings of Surak, the philosopher that redefined Vulcan society by developing a method to cast off all emotions and think logically. Vulcans are, at their biological core, a violent and emotional species, which is a legacy they try to bury, and Sybok is an unwelcome reminder of that. In The Final Frontier, he steals the Enterprise to go find God. Sybok hasn't totally shown up in Strange New Worlds yet, except for the back of his head, but his presence is felt. During this time, Sybok has been trapped in a Vulcan rehab center under an alias. His partner Angel attempts to rescue him in the first season episode The Serene Squall, but is unsuccessful. There's a very interesting backstory that can emerge from a character they clearly have plans for. A mysterious Vulcan shows up in one of the Season 3 trailers, played by Patton Oswalt. Fans are guessing that this may be Sybok, but the jury is still out. The Sybok we last saw was bearded, an unusual feature for a Vulcan, and this new Vulcan seems pretty serious. Maybe it's just Sybok faking his way out of the asylum, or maybe it's just a Vulcan we don't know yet. It's pretty deep Trek lore, but stick with us. In the original series episode, The Squire of Gothos, the crew of the Enterprise encounters an alien with seemingly unlimited powers and a flair for the dramatic named Trelane. It's never really explained what he is, except that he's actually just a kid messing around with his humanoid toys, a twist ending that is revealed when his parents show up to scold him. Move forward to the premiere of The Next Generation when the Enterprise encounters another omnipotent, dramatic alien who can snap his fingers and change reality into whatever he wants it to be. This parallel was not unnoticed by Trek fans, and that included author Peter David, who wrote the non-canonical book Q Squared, which decided that Trelane is actually a Q. It's a moment that's easy to miss, but in the Season 3 trailer, we get Rhys Darby dressed very much like the original Trelane, snapping his fingers like a Q, possibly making this fan canon official once and for all. It's been a long time since we've had a proper goofball Q adventure, and no, the humorless dull Q of Picard doesn't count. Strange New Worlds thrives on giving the audience the unexpected, but with only 10 episodes per season, there's a lot to fit into a small space, and there are a lot of questions to be answered. How does the Enterprise have access to a holodeck way before they're formally introduced to starships? How are the Gorn eliminated as a threat so thoroughly that we never hear about them again until Lower Decks? And can we please get the return of Trek's best time-traveling guest character, Berlinghoff Rasmussen?
In about 2 minutes, we should be on our way back to a place called New Jersey.
Fortunately, the series has already been ordered for a 4th season in advance of the premiere of Season 3, and as a prequel series, it exists in a perfect space. It's light enough to be fun, it doesn't really concern itself too much with fitting into the massive Star Trek timeline, and best of all, it feels like the best of what Star Trek has to offer.